Reliance Church. You guys good? I'm Ted. I'm one of the pastors here, and we're going to be finishing up John's Gospel today. John chapter 21 is where we're going to be. We have been in John's Gospel for 18 months. That's, I believe, 78 weeks that we have been in John's Gospel, and we are going to finish it today. Where are we going after this? I'm going to be teaching in 1st and 2nd Timothy, beginning in the new year. Basically, 1st and 2nd Timothy, the big idea is, how is the church supposed to operate? And that's kind of a big question in these days. What's the church for? What's it all about? How should church function and operate? And so we're going to go to school in January, and we're going to see, biblically speaking, who are we, Reliance Church, and what should we be doing? And we're gonna take our spiritual pulse, and we're gonna do a compass check and make sure that as a body of believers we're doing what God intends the body of believers to be doing. And so that'll be in January. We'll start that up, and you can look forward to that. Today we're going to finish John's Gospel, John 21. Hey, by the way, just before I forget, Christmas Eve services, let me give you a save the date and mark your calendars, 2, 4, 6 p.m. Those are our 3 services on Christmas Eve. So you might want to just jot that down. Christmas Eve, 2 p.m., 4 p.m., 6 p.m., and there you go. All right, John chapter 21 is where we're at. And let me just kind of set the stage. Really sort of the focus here, a lot of people call John chapter 21 the postscript of John's Gospel. Kind of the crescendo of the Gospel occurs in John chapter 20 with Jesus' resurrection and the fulfillment of the Gospel and the promise being delivered and all of that. John chapter 21, it's Jesus dealing really primarily with the Apostle Peter. And kind of what's in view here is the passing of the baton. And you think of a relay race and that passing of the baton, so critically important. Allison Felix, she runs for the U.S. track team, the U.S. women's track team. And on August 18th, 2016, if you were watching the Rio Olympics, she had her worst nightmare happened where it was in the Baton Pass, and she and the one she was passing the baton to, they dropped the baton. And it was a qualifying race that was going to put them in the gold medal race, and so obviously they lost. Fortunately for them, they got a second chance because it was ruled that they were interfered with, and they ended up being able to rerun that race and then qualified for the gold medal race, which they eventually won the gold. So, hey, here, go USA. But this baton pass is really key. That's kind of what's in view here in chapter 21. Jesus passing the baton on to his disciples. And the problem that's in view here is that Peter is in danger of dropping the baton. So we're going to focus on 3 things today. Number 1, Peter is restless and distracted. Number 2, Peter must be restored to duty. And thirdly, Peter must be reoriented in his devotion. And all of this has direct application for us today. So let's pick it up. John chapter 21, verse 1. It says, after these things. Now, what's after what things? And, in large general terms, it's after the gospel, right? That God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever should believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. That the word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, full of grace and truth, the only begotten of the Father, right? And so this is Jesus. And so certainly after that having taken place, but in particular after these things, is referring to chapter 20, where we have the event of the resurrection and Jesus's first 2 manifestations of himself in the 8 days that follow. That's primarily what's in view here. So it's after these things, Jesus showed himself again to his disciples. That word showed, very important. We'll come right back to that. And he did so at the Sea of Tiberias. And in this way, he showed himself. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and so that's James and John, known as the sons of thunder as well. Jesus nicknamed them that. And then two others, these are unnamed disciples, were together. And Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we are going with you also. And they went out and immediately got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. Poor Peter, every time we read about him fishing, and the dude made his living fishing, a commercial fisherman by trade, but every time in the Bible when you read about Peter going fishing, he catches nothing. So apparently he wasn't a very good fisherman. Verse 4, but when the morning had now come, Jesus stood on the shore, and yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So Jesus is manifesting himself and showing himself. And that's really a important factor here for us to understand here is that Jesus is showing himself. He's revealing himself. That's what the idea of him showing himself. This is kind of the same when you read the book of Revelation. It talks about what is Revelation? It's the unveiling. It's the revealing of Jesus Christ. The whole book is about showing who Jesus is and the person and work of Jesus to come. And so this is a key, John chapter 21, Jesus showing himself to his disciples, revealing himself. And so it says there in verse 1 that he showed himself to them at the Sea of Tiberias. And the Sea of Tiberias is also known as the Lake of Gennesaret in Luke chapter 5. And it's most commonly known as the Sea of Galilee. Just went by a bunch of different names. And the reason why the disciples are there in the first place is because Jesus had commanded them to go. We read in John chapter 20 at Jesus' resurrection that he told Mary Magdalene to go talk to the disciples and convey the message of his resurrection. We know from other gospel accounts Mary Magdalene wasn't there alone. She was with a group of women who had gone to the tomb early that morning. And Matthew's gospel, Matthew 28, specifically in verse 10, records that Jesus told these women, do not be afraid, go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. And this is not a contradiction, by the way, because we read in John's gospel in John chapter 20, prior to his revealing himself to them at the Sea of Galilee, that when they were in Jerusalem after his resurrection, for 8-day period after his resurrection, on resurrection evening, he appeared to his disciples 7 days later. So on the 8th day, he appeared to them in the same place in that upper room in Jerusalem. So he's already appeared to them twice. He wasn't saying when he told the women that was exclusively or the first place at the Sea of Galilee that he was going to meet with them, just that he was going to meet with them. And so at this point, he's already met with them twice in Jerusalem. They're now at the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is 75 miles from Jerusalem. And these guys, they can't call a cab. They can't get an Uber to go down to the Sea of Galilee from Jerusalem. They have to walk, right? It reminds me of that kid, went to his dad. He's like, hey, Dad, buy me a car. And his dad says, I'm not going to buy you a car. He's like, come on, Dad, buy me a car. And the dad goes, well, first thing, you might want to think about getting a haircut, if you want me to think about that. And he's like, come on, Dad, Jesus had long hair. And he's like, yeah, and he walked everywhere he went too. So these guys, they had to walk to the Sea of Galilee. And so it's probably a couple of weeks at least since Jesus has risen from the dead at this point. And you would think they're there because Jesus told them to go. They have seen Jesus already raised from the dead. So you would think that these disciples would be waiting faithfully and patiently for Jesus' return, right? And they would just be mindful of the fact that Jesus had called them as his disciples, and that, hey, now we're graduating, and now we get to step to the front. We get to take this baton. Now we should be waiting for our marching orders, and that's kind of what you would expect, but that's not how it goes down. And if you're taking notes, write this first point down, restless and distracted. This is what's going on specifically with Peter, but he's having an influencing factor with the other disciples, because you notice he says in verse 3, I am going fishing, and they said to him, we are going with you also. And you're like, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal in his saying, I'm going fishing, the Greek word for that I am going phrase is hupago. And don't ask me how to spell it. I write it phonetically in my notes. It's hupago. But it literally means to withdraw, to go away, and to depart. And what it seems to suggest is that what Peter is doing here is he is withdrawing from his duty as a called and sent one of Jesus Christ, and he is departing from that primary responsibility, and he is going back to his former way of life. He's saying, hey, you know what? Maybe I was Jesus' disciple, but now everything's changed. And so now, yeah, you know, I believe in Jesus and all of that, but I think what I'm going to do vocationally for the rest of my life isn't going to be about that. I think what it's going to be is I'm going to go back to my old way of life. Now, with that in mind, turn to the left. Go to Luke's gospel. I'm just going to spend a few minutes here, so you're going to want to turn there. Luke chapter 5, and we're going to look at Peter's calling into ministry in the first place. Luke chapter 5. Beginning in verse 1. The scene, the setting is the Lake of Galilee. In this instance, it's referred to as the Sea of Gennesaret. And it says, so it was as the multitude pressed about him, this is Jesus, to hear the word of God, that he stood by the Lake of Gennesaret. Okay, and so what's happening here is Jesus, this is earlier in Jesus' ministry, he's making a circuit around the Galilee region, he's preaching the gospel, and the crowds are starting to throng to him. And so on this particular morning, he's got his back up against the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Gennesaret, and all the crowd is pressing in to hear him. So he needs physically to create some barrier, some distance between him and the crowd, so that he can broadcast to all the crowd that is gathered there. And so he saw two boats standing by the lake, but the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets. We're going to find out that these boats belong to Simon Peter and to James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who are in Peter's fishing business. They all work together. And what has occurred is that they have fished all night and they caught nothing again. And so now what they've done is, after a whole night of fishing, is now they've washed up their boats, and now they're cleaning all their nets. I don't know about you, but if I fished all night and caught nothing, I might be thinking about selling my nets. But they're cleaning them up, you know, to hopefully, hey, we're gonna catch some more tomorrow night. It's another day at night, by the way. And they caught when the way it worked then, it still works this way now, is that fishermen, they catch their fish at night. That's when the good catch is. They fish in the shallow waters, and that's in John chapter 21. As we're going to continue there in a minute, we're going to see, you know, strategically they're fishing in shallow water because that's the way it worked back then. And that'll factor in here as we continue. So Jesus sees their boats there, the fishermen are washing their nets. And then verse 3, he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and he taught the multitudes from the boat. So Jesus is going to use this boat as his pulpit, and that's where we get the name pulpit, by the way. It's the place on the ship where you steer the ship, right? The pulpit. And so Jesus is going to preach from Peter's pulpit, if you will. And there's so much metaphor to see here. Basically, get this idea that Jesus gets into Peter's boat. Metaphorically speaking, a day has happened in your life, or I pray will happen in your life, and if it hasn't happened yet, that Jesus will get in your boat. He gets in your boat and he begins to say, I'm in your boat, Peter, and now I'm going to work through your boat, and I'm going to preach the gospel through the boat of your life. And so Jesus does this, and he sits down and he teaches the multitude from the boat. Now, just put yourself in Peter's shoes here for a second. This cat has fished all night. He's caught nothing. He's cleaning everything up, and now all of a sudden Jesus is in his boat, and he's like, dude, I just cleaned that boat. And now in a minute, he's going to tell him, hey, put your nets out and let's go fishing. And Peter, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting, but if it were me, I'd be like, dude, come on. I just worked all night. I just cleaned all this stuff up. All I want to do is go home and eat breakfast and go to bed. But here he is. So he gets in his boat. And when he stopped speaking, he said to Simon, launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. Again, they fish at night, they fish in the shallows. Jesus is saying, hey, fish in the day, in the deep kind of thing. But Simon answered and he said to him, Master, we've toiled all night and caught nothing. What's the translation of that? Peter is saying, hey, carpenter, I'm the fisherman around here. And this, we already worked and caught nothing. But nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net. Now, Jesus didn't ask him to let down a net. He asked him to let down his nets, plural. Peter's response is, look, this isn't going to work, but I'll let one net down. That's kind of what's going on here. And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking. And so they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come help them. And they came and they filled both the boats so that they began to sink. This is a magnificent haul. By the way, I can't read through Luke chapter 5 without having a little trip down memory lane and being really encouraged. It's a long story. Here's the short version. When we had started this church, we were meeting at Linfield High School. And God was adding daily to the church such as should be saved, just like you read in the book of Acts. They continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and the fellowship and the breaking of bread and prayer. So teaching the word and fellowship and focusing on prayer meetings and having communion together. And as they focused on those as priorities, God just added daily to the church, right? Well, we were going through that. And so God was adding daily to our church. It was great, but we didn't have a home. We were at Linfield, kind of, set up, tear down sort of existence. And I always tell people this, that the church building, it's not like the end all be all. It's like the family car. It's important. You need it to get from point A to point B. But at the end of the day, what you really care about is the family that you're putting in the vehicle, right? But we didn't have a vehicle. We needed one. And there was a church that was meeting on the property here. God had put us together, providentially speaking. I told you this is the short version. It actually is. But God had put us together relationally. And Pastor Jim was Jim Diaz, who's one of our pastors now, was pastoring the church that was here. And so we started meeting with them about having the two churches merged together. And we didn't make a love connection for the first several times. It was kind of like, no, it's not going to make sense for us to get together. But then there was a time where we finally, all the elders of their church and our church got together. We were at my house, cooking hamburgers and hanging out. And I took the guys to Luke chapter 5, and I started to read through this story. And I basically said, look, here's the deal. All I know to tell you is that Jesus has gotten into our boat. We're kind of like Peter. And our nets are breaking. And we see you guys as our partners in the other boat. And what we're proposing to you is come on out and join us, and let's fill both the boats so full that it'll blow our minds, right? And so that's when Temecula Community Church merged into Reliance Church, and ultimately we moved here and built this building and all, and God's been so gracious to us, and we've been watching God fill our nets. It's just wonderful. And so this is what Peter's experiencing, and this is God's calling Peter to this work. And it says, so they filled the boats, they filled the boats, and both boats now are so full that they're sinking. Now, you're a fisherman. You're a commercial fisherman. Your boat is sinking. Like, nothing else matters right now, right? It's like, let's save the boat. No. Verse 8, when Peter saw it, what's he do? He falls down at Jesus' knees. He says, depart from me, for I'm a sinful man. What's going on? Peter's like, here, he called me to this work. I doubted. In token, I just sort of threw out one net. He blew my mind, filled up both of our boats. I'm unworthy of you, is what's going on in his heart. And verse 9 says, for he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish, what they had just taken, right? So this is what's going on in his mind. I am unworthy. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Why does he mention them? Because they're Peter's partners in the other boat. And who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, here's his calling, do not be afraid, for from now on you will catch men. Peter, you used to be a commercial fisherman. I'm calling you to cast your nets and catch men. You're going to be my disciple. And so verse 11 says, when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and they followed him. Now that word forsook is a very important word. The attitude is that it is to let go, to give up, and to send away. And what's happening here is that Peter has spent his whole life in one vocation, and Jesus is now calling him to something deeper, and he willingly forsakes it. He lets go, he sends it away. It reminds me when God called me into ministry. I was in the fire department, and I don't know how familiar you are with the job, but usually in a fire department you get one opening and you get 2,000, 3,000 applicants for that one job. And so I've got this job and I grew up watching, Johnny and Roy on an Emergency, if you're old enough to remember the show. When I was a little kid, they were my heroes, right? And so this is what I had aspired my entire life to do and to be. But I'm telling you, a day came when God called me into ministry, and I could not get out of that fast enough. It was God had changed this passion in my heart, and this calling for my life. And this is what he's doing with Peter. He's called him into ministry, and you got to understand, this is the heart of God. See, a lot of people, they relate to God like he's angry, like he's just looking to fry you like an ant. God's the little kid with the magnifying glass, and you're the ant. And this is, how people relate to God. That is not the heart of God. The heart of God is that none should perish, but that all should have everlasting life. The heart of God is that he so loves the world that he sent Jesus Christ to suffer and die for the sins of mankind, so that none would perish, but that all might have everlasting life. And when he calls Peter into ministry, it's a rescue op. It's saying, listen, I have kids that are going to hell, or people that I want to be my kids that are going to hell. They are running headlong to hell, and I need somebody to rescue them. God, speaking through the prophet Jeremiah, he promised Israel, I will give you shepherds after my own heart who will guide you with knowledge and understanding. Jeremiah 3:15. This is the heart of God, and this is the calling for Peter into ministry, and it would seem that he's walking away from this. Back in John chapter 21, I'm going fishing. I'm leaving. I'm departing from that calling. And why is it? Why does he do this? And the answer is really unknowable. I mean, how do you crawl into Peter's heart and mind and understand why this guy who had been a follower of Jesus, who had forsaken everything and had gone after Jesus, and who had seen Jesus rise from the dead, he's already appeared to him twice. He's promised he's going to appear to him again. And why on earth would Peter then forsake everything? And the fact is, we don't know. Like, is Jesus taking too long? Is Peter starting now to doubt? Is he really coming back? I mean, that possibly could be it. I think a bigger possibility of what's going on in Peter's heart is the same thing that happened in Luke 5. Jesus shows up, does this miraculous work, and Peter just says, I'm unworthy. I doubted. Just depart from me. I'm a sinful man. Think about it from Peter's perspective. Right now, what has recently happened besides Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection and all of that that's transpired? Now weeks in his rearview mirror. But what happened right before that is Peter denied the Lord 3 times. And so Peter might be thinking, I'm unworthy. You know what? This is all, Jesus clearly is a miraculous God, and I'm horribly flawed, blow it, and I just need to go back to fishing. I think that's the dynamic that's going on in his life. But there's a dangerous thing here because Peter's not the only guy that goes. Peter's like, I'm going fishing, and everybody else goes, oh, we're going to go with you. See, Peter had influence. And every one of you here, on some level, you are a person of influence. And we have to ask ourselves a question, how is it that I'm leading other people? How do you lead other people? Because the thing is that you've got this influence over people. You know, that poem that, you write in the gospel, a chapter each day by the things that you do and the words that you say, and people read what you write, whether it's faithless or true. What's the gospel according to you? And the thing is that you're preaching to people every day in how you're living. And so I'm going fishing, and everybody else is like, yeah, we'll go with you too. Story concludes, they went out, fished all night, they caught nothing, which Peter calls Tuesday apparently. And so, but why? What's going on here? Look, Jesus isn't going to bless this. He didn't call them to this. I think it's a work of their flesh. And I think so many works of our flesh, they're just fruitless. They're pointless. It's a worthwhile question, like, is there something that you're beating your head against the wall trying to attain that you're not attaining? Is there something that you're trying to get that you're failing at? Is there some deal you're trying to close that it just ain't closing, and you have to say, is God in this? And so Jesus, he's manifesting himself. Why? He's revealing himself to these guys because Peter's off course. The whole point of this object lesson right now is that Jesus is basically saying to Peter, I haven't called you to fish, Peter. I've called you to fish for men. So Jesus shows up. They don't know it's Jesus. Verse 5, then Jesus said to them, children, have you any food? In other words, did you catch anything? Now, what does a fisherman normally answer you if they haven't caught anything? What's the phrase? You should have seen. You guys need to get out more. You need to fish more. You should have seen the one that got away, right? Oh, I don't have one, but man, you should have seen the one that got away. They don't even have the gumption to say that. They are so defeated. They answered, no, we didn't get nothing, right? You know it's bad when a fisherman doesn't even tell you about the one that got away. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. Oh, is that all? Okay, so they cast, and now they were not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. Light bulb moment, you got to know, because it was Peter, James, and John, the sons of Zebedee. They're the ones in our story now. Hey, we'll go with you. And they were the ones that were there at the miraculous catch of fish, and they, I can just see that it's like, wow, the last time this happened, it was the Lord. And all of a sudden, John's the guy that gets it. Verse 7 says, therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved, who's this? John, just say John for crying out loud. So that disciple Jesus loved says to Peter, it's the Lord. Now, when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he had removed it, and he plunged into the sea. That makes no sense to me. Like, you're going to jump in the boat, you kind of take your clothes off to jump in the boat. I don't know if this is a first century wetsuit or what. But anyway, he puts everything on, plunges into the sea. Verse 8, but the other disciples, they came in the little boat. They're not impetuous like Peter. I'm not jumping in and getting wet. We'll row the boat in like normal people here. So they row the boat in, for they were not too far from the land, but only about 200 cubits. They're fishing in the shallows at night like they do. And they come in, and now all of them that came in behind Peter, they're dragging the net with the fish. And then as soon as they had come to land, they saw, notice what they see, a fire of coals there and fish laid on it and bread. Just get the picture, all right? And I'm not going to unpack this too much, not going to read too much into this. I'm simply going to say this, that what were they doing? They were fishing. They're looking for fish. They're looking for that thing that's going to fill them, right? Literally and metaphorically speaking. And what do they find? They find in Jesus, it's all that and so much more. Not only has he got the fish, but he's got the fire, he's got the bread, he's got the whole meal and everything that's preparing. Everything that they truly need to be filled, literally and figuratively, is there waiting for them on the shore. And Jesus has provided it. And so Jesus says to them, verse 10, bring some of the fish which you've just caught. And Simon Peter, he went up and he dragged the net to land full of large fish. And then he gives us the number, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not broken. And Jesus said to them, come and eat breakfast. And yet none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? Because they all knew it was the Lord. And then Jesus, verse 13, came and he took the bread and he gave it to them, and likewise the fish. And this is now the third time that Jesus showed himself to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Now the other Gospels detail a lot more times. John only focuses on 3. But there were a lot of other times after his resurrection that Jesus had revealed himself. Chronologically, this is the third time John has revealed the first 3 times that Jesus revealed himself. Now, why the specific number, 153 fish? What is the symbolism of that? St. Augustine, who was a 4th century theologian, here's his hypothesis. He basically says that the number 153 represents the complete fullness and totality of the church. And here's how he came up with that. He said the number 10 is a symbolic number which denotes fullness and an entirety, a totality. This is what the number 10 symbolizes. And he said the number of 7 is like it. This is the number of completion. So the number 10, the number 7, you put them together, you've got 17. And then he said this. He goes, if you take the number 17 and you take all the individual numbers in the number 17 and you add them all up together, you will reach 153. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 and so on. And all of this together, you will come up to this number that's detailed here, 153 fish. Supporting this theory, other people will say, yes, the totality and the completeness of the church, yes, that's what's in view here. And the unbroken net in verse 11, contrasted with the broken net in Luke 5 when, it's just catching fish, but hey, now you're going to catch men. And so now, even though he's catching fish again in John 21, there's an unbrokenness to it, pointing to the symbolism of the total fullness of the church, and that this is further proof of that. Other people say, you've also in verse 1 or verse 2 rather, when they're naming all the disciples, and you've got Simon Peter named, and Thomas is named, and Nathaniel's named, James and John are named, but then you've got these 2 guys who are unnamed, and they symbolize all of the unnamed disciples over thousands of years of church history, how the church just continues exponentially to grow, just countless, nameless, just faceless, just this mass of people. And so, all of these people say, man, we think, St. Augustine was onto something. 153 represents the totalness, fullness of the church. Here's the deal. Nobody knows what 153 means. Nobody knows. People come up with all kinds of guesses. What's the symbolism of 153 fish? We don't know. Maybe it's just a statement of fact, and it has no symbolism whatsoever. There's just 153 fish in the net. It was amazing. Should have been there. Here's what we do know. We know for sure the significance of Jesus' manifestation to Peter. We know for sure that what's going on in Peter's life is that he needs to be reoriented and dialed into, hey man, because what are you? You're distracted, and you know you've gotten off track here. We know for a fact, our second point, that Jesus needs to restore Peter to duty. And as we get into these next verses, I think it's very important for us to read these next verses in light of Peter's denial of the Lord. He denied the Lord 3 times. And we're going to see the Lord restore Peter to duty here, and he's going to reemphasize 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Tend my sheep. So we continue. We'll pick it up in verse 14. It says, this is now the 3rd time Jesus showed himself to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. And so when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? What are the these that he's talking about? Hey, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? We have a couple of possibilities. One is, do you love me more than these fish? Because what did Simon do? He had kind of, he'd gotten sidetracked. He'd gotten reoriented to a different, not Jesus' called purpose for him. He's, seems to love fishing right now. So, hey, you love me more than the fish, the boat, the nets, the all of this stuff. Those of you that are fishermen, There's nothing like being out on the boat on the ocean. It's like, Calgon, take me away, man. This is the place to be. Hey, Peter, do you love me more than these? Could have been the disciples. You'll recall Peter had said right before his denial, by the way, because Jesus said, look, hey, Peter, tonight, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And what is Peter's answer to him? Well, if you recall Matthew's gospel, Matthew 26, Peter basically said to Jesus, even if all of these other losers deny you, I'm never going to deny you. I'll never forsake you. And so, do you love me more than these? Could be Jesus saying, hey, do you still love me more than everybody else? Guy who denied me 3 times? So, do you love me? And it's very key, because the word that Jesus has used when he says, Peter, do you love me? The Greek word that Jesus used was agape. Agape love is divine love. It's a fervent, unconditional love. It is a choice that is not dependent on any outside force. It's not like, I love you. Oh, you were unfaithful to me. Now I hate you. It's that, no, I love you today, I love you tomorrow, I will love you next week, I will love you next year. I have chosen that I will love you. And Jesus says to Peter, do you love me like that? And Peter, we read, says to him, the end of verse 15, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He doesn't use the word agape. He uses the word phileo. Phileo is a term that means, look, I love you with a fondness and an affection, a brotherly fondness. I'm not using that word unconditional. Peter might say, because you and I both know that I told you that I would never deny you, and basically said I loved you unconditionally, and then the conditions of your crucifixion showed up, and I bailed on you like third period French. And so the deal here is that Peter is basically saying, you and I both know that I don't love you like that, because I'm a failure. What does Jesus say? Get out of here, loser. You don't love me like that, you're out. No, he says, feed my lambs. Verse 16, Jesus says to Peter a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you agape me? Do you love me unconditionally? Peter said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I phileo you. I love you like a brother. Got a lot of affection for you, Jesus. And Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. Verse 17, Jesus said to him a third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you phileo me? You phileo me then. You have affection for me. You love me like a brother. And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you phileo me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I phileo you. I love you like a brother. I love you like with that affection. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Here's the deal. I believe that what we're reading here is Peter coming face to face with who Peter is. And Peter basically would say, I used to relate to God on the basis of my emotions and my feelings. And my emotions and my feelings were overstated. I had a lot of confidence in Peter, and Peter let Peter down. And so I'm not going to make this emotional boast, God, I love you unconditionally, and you know, it just no matter what happens, this is what Peter's basically saying to Jesus, I'm going to be just flat out, boldly honest with you and just say, this is who I am and this is what I'm capable of. I have a great fondness for you. I have a great love for you. But you and I both know that when the conditions turn south, that sometimes I doubt. And Jesus' response to him is, Peter, I got work for you to do. Lesson for all of us. God is not looking for your ability. He's looking for your availability. He is looking for you to be somebody who honestly and with integrity just walks with him. He already knows who you are. So I'm going to be perfect, God, and I'm going to love you with this perfect love. No, you're not. But it's the heart that says, that Peter said when Jesus asked his disciples, who do men say that I am? Well, some say you're Elijah, some say well, you're one of the prophets, yada, yada. Okay, who do you say that I am? Peter says, you're the Christ, you're the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father is in heaven. And he said, and I'll tell you this, I'm going to build my church on you. Not on Peter the man, on Peter's profession that Jesus is the Christ, that he's the Son of the living God. That's what matters. That's what makes the difference. You and God is a majority, right? God and anybody, God plus whatever is the majority. You plus whatever, if it's not God, is distinctly the minority and on the losing side of the equation. So the deal here, Jesus he's basically saying, Peter, don't go back to fishing. Don't give up. Don't say, depart from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. Don't say, you know what, maybe before I denied the Lord. No, I'm passing the baton. You're my guy. I've chosen you. Get to it. And this applies to all of us on whatever level it is. God's called you. He's chosen you. And as a believer in Christ, you have received the baton. And if you've dropped it, pick it up, because you're not going to be disqualified. Pick it up. Brings us to our third point. Peter needs to be reoriented in his devotion. So, verse 20, then Peter, so Jesus just said, look, you're my guy. You're my guy. I'm going to meet you right where you're at. You're going to feed my lambs. You're going to tend my sheep. And verse 20, actually, let me back it up. Verse 18, Jesus says to him, most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and you walked where you wished, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. What does Jesus mean by this? Well, the next verse gives us the interpretation. It says, this he spoke, signifying by what death he, Peter, would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. Jesus basically said to Peter, look, here's the deal. Pete, you're going to serve me, and it's going to cost you. And ultimately what's going to happen is they're going to crucify you just like they crucified me. This is what Jesus is saying. This is the manner of death. Church historians tell us Peter was indeed crucified, and when the time came, he said, I'm not worthy to be crucified like my Lord. If you're going to crucify me upside down. And that is how Peter died. Verse 20, then Peter, so he hears this. How does he react? Peter, turning around, he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, John, right, following, who had also leaned on his breast at the supper and said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? And Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, Lord, what about him? What about this man? And Jesus said to him, if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Loose translation, what Jesus says to Peter, it's none of your business what I do with him. You quit looking at him, you follow me. And then the saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die, yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if I will that he remains till I come, what is that to you? And this is the disciple who testifies of these things and wrote of these things, and we know that his testimony is true. John's just basically saying, look, I'm the guy who wrote the Gospel of John, and it's true. And verse 25, there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I supposed even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Amen. All right, let's deal with Peter's heart here as we wrap this thing up. He's got to be reoriented in devotion. Why? Here's Peter's problem. He has a toxic mix of covetousness and jealousy that's going on in his heart, where John's concerned. Peter's attitude here is, if I'm going to suffer, then John needs to suffer too. And we all deal with this on various levels, because here's the thing. God does a work in your life, and sometimes it requires that you walk a very difficult road. And there's times when we can get this toxic mix of covetousness and jealousy that goes on where other people are concerned. And we can say, well, what about that person? Why did I lose my job and they didn't lose their job? Why is this difficult thing happening to me and it's not happening in their life? And I won't ask for a show of hands, but it happens to where we start comparing ourselves with other people, and you get this ugly thing that begins to happen where you're like, it's not fair. And you're doing for them what you're not doing for me, and I'm getting the short end of the stick, and it's implying that God is not good, and what you're giving, and we see it with our kids all the time. It's like, wait a minute, what does he get? You gave him more cereal than you gave me. No, I didn't. You both have the same, right? I've discovered the trick to that, by the way. You have the kid pour the bowls. You say, hey, you pour the cereal out. Your brother gets first pick. They will count out the pieces of cereal to make sure they are even, Yeah, go. You pour them. Your brother gets to pick first. Go ahead. It'll be even then, baby. But anyway, we get this attitude with God, right? Here's the deal. We got to understand. Your race is not my race. And his race is not your race, and your race is not her race. Your race is unique, it's individual. I've got a verse, Hebrews chapter 12, put it on the screen for you. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Right? That phrase, marked out for us, some translations, the race set before us. Some translations translate it, the race that lies before us. That phrase, marked out, in the Greek, the word means the race that is appointed and destined for you. You have a race that's appointed and destined for you. What do we do in this race? Verse 2, Hebrews chapter 12, 2. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, which the Bible basically declares that Jesus to this day, right now, is at the right hand of the throne of God, the place of the intercessor, the defense attorney. He's praying for you by name in that place. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. And this is what Jesus says to Peter here. Look, what I'm going to do with John ain't none of your business. Stop looking at John. Jesus says, you look at me. And the idea is that he has a race that's marked out for you. It's been said the difference between where you are and where God wants you to be is the painful experience that you refuse to endure. God wants to get you somewhere, and he's marked a race out for you to run. And it's going to look different for different people. Think about church history. Jim Elliot, missionary for God, dreamt of doing great things. What did God mark out in his race? That he would be martyred for his faith. And the very people that he went to save killed him, took his life. God used it for good. God had a plan for his life. Billy Graham, he was an evangelist and preached to kings and presidents and so on. God had a race marked out for Billy Graham. And he's got a race marked out for you and me. My race is to pastor a local church and to raise up people, disciples that know, love, and serve Jesus, and train up pastors and plant churches. That's my race. That's what he's called me to. He's called you to something completely different, but it's your race. And it's my race, and it all looks different. And so you have to be settled on that. I want to close with 3 questions as we close out this gospel and really kind of take a walk with this. Number 1, ask yourself, and these will go up at the end of the service too, by the way, what race has God marked out for me? And how am I tempted to toxic, jealous comparison? Supporting scripture for that, Galatians 5:7. You were running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? Second question, what painful experience has God marked out for me, past or present? And how did I or how am I responding? And third question, what tempts me to restless distraction? And how can I combat this in Christ? You know, thinking about Peter, I'm going fishing. Restless, distracted. No. God's calling on his life.